Good afternoon, lovely ladies, gorgeous gentlemen, and friends and family beyond the binary. We are gathered here for our very last talk for this afternoon. Hi and welcome back everyone online. This one's going to be a cracker. I absolutely adore everyone on this panel, but I'm just going to hand it straight over to the amazing, wonderful Dr. Fiona Foley. And she knows what she's doing, so I'm leaving now.
Hello. Thank you, Cody. My name's Fiona Foley. I come from the Wundine clan of the Butchulla Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners, the Kaurna people, on whose land we are gathered today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So I want to just go to the first slide. The theme for today is, and it came in late in the piece from our leader, Francesca Cabillo, legacy acknowledging the lengthy and painstaking process that First Nations arts leaders have accomplished over the past 50 years through bravery, courage, resilience and activism. On the panel today is Djon Mundine. Julie Gough is joining us via Zoom, so she'll be flashed up on the screen periodically. And Vernon, all are prominent national and international artists, curators and public intellectuals. I have a series of 8 questions I will ask them, and if we get through that, we will open it up to discussion and you can ask them a question at the end. So the first question, Djon, I'm not going to go into their bios because you can Google that for yourself and we're trying to save time. And we all decided upon that. Djon, you are known as the first Aboriginal curator in Australia. I wonder if this detail is taught in contemporary art history at our universities or at art schools today. You spent 16 years working and living in Milingimbi and Ramingining in Arnhem Land as an art and craft advisor. As successive Aboriginal artists move into the industry, 2 very important exhibitions you were involved with took place in 1993 and 1994. Around this time, you left Ramingining and we co-curated an exhibition titled Tierra Barabawari AU for the 5th Havana Biennale in 1994. And following its return to Australia, it was exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Art Sydney, featuring 16 artists. I believe there are some big gaps in our collective knowledge and the national narratives we weave. The other exhibition that also rarely gets a mention today is Aratjara. How important do you think? So the first part of this question is about the MCA Tierra Barabawari AU show, and then I'll move on to Aratjara specifically. How important do you think it is to remember the statement Tierra Barabawari AU made by Padagorang, also attributed to Pemawoi, which translated means, I shall never become a white man?
Is that right now? Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I think they're both very important in a number of ways. I think people tend to underwrite the Museum of Contemporary Art and its place in the Australian art world. I think people didn't like the art world can be very vain. What do they call it? Vanity whereas they sting, and people are very cruel to each other. Just generally. So I found the MCA, the art world wasn't quite ready for a museum of contemporary art, and asked all these stupid questions about how can you have a museum that's about contemporary art? Like it must be as thick as 2 planks to ask that question. But there are a lot of planks around the docks and structures, you know. Lots of timber there in the art world. And then when we collaborated to put that together, It's about three things. I think my curatorial practice is really about three things, and I've repeated this a couple of times in the last week. In the art world, there's about 5 things that they teach you in kindergarten in the art, if you go to art school, kindergarten, that you look at an artwork and it's about colour and line and balance and texture and something else, I don't quite know what it is. And they're the things you look at an artwork and work out, is it good, bad, or why do I like it, etc. Well, most probably in Aboriginal art practice, there are 3 things that I try to work off. The first is a site, the site where I'm going to do this artwork, and curating an exhibition I see as an artwork in itself, and writing about. The second point of that is your relationship to that art, to that site. How do you relate to that site? And the third is the time. The time. It can be the time of an event that happened there. It might be the time that an individual lived there. Might be a season, might be a simple season, environmental season that takes place, or a political time. So in this instance, we were both asked whether we'd like to take an exhibition to Havana in Cuba, and that was right at a very bad time in the United States and Cuban relationships. It was about the time of the worst time economically for Cuba. They'd lost a lot of Russian support. They were really struggling. That was about a site, the site on Circular Quay. We chose that title, I Shall Never Become a White Man, from Paddy Garang, and then used in Eric Wilmot's book on Pemulwuy. He used it to say Pemulwuy said this, but in fact it was Paddy Garang who said this. So we had an Aboriginal voice, an Aboriginal person associated with that site, and they'd made this statement. And a little bit of research generally will lead you to a primary voice from that site. We're Aboriginal. We wanted to take an Aboriginal exhibition to Cuba to represent our voice, our Aboriginal voice. And the Cuban Biennale was called the Third World Biennale. So primarily wasn't white Western middle class people. It was primarily people from Africa, Asia, South America, etc. Brown people like us, so to speak. And the time was right. They needed support. Cuba needed support for us to be there. And we needed to make a strong exhibition and a strong political statement for really our first exhibition at the MCA. So we bonded with the MCA, we bonded with their staff, who were really excited that they were doing a show and sending it to a place that was very much politically on the nose with the Australian government, with the United States government, etc. Yeah.
So my second question following up is, Arat Jara Art of the First Australians was a project initiated by Swiss curator Bernhard Luthi, Gary Foley, the then director of the Aboriginal Arts Board, Chicka Dixon and Lynn Onus. This project was in the planning close on 10 years. In 1993-94, this cutting-edge exhibition toured to 3 venues: the Kunstamlung in Dusseldorf, the Hayward Gallery in London, and the Louisiana Museum in Denmark. As the touring curator, Djon, at all 3 venues, you gave hundreds of talks, witnessed attendance figures of 250,000 and saw 10,000 catalogues sold out in English and German. Arat Jara was supposed to be shown on its return to Australia at the National Gallery of Victoria, but this was cancelled 3 months prior to its return here. In addition, you wrote numerous reports to the Australia Council. Were those reports ever acted upon regarding the future direction of Aboriginal art internationally, is my first question. And can you tell us a little about this time and the possible opportunities lost?
Well, that's a lot in that question. I'll try to keep it short. The exhibition was put together, as I was told, both by Gary Foley and Chicka Dixon, that was, as 1988 approached, and the Commonwealth government, the national government, was really gearing up to make the coming of the first fleet of starving convicts to this continent was going to be celebrated as Jimmy Everett and lots of other people have said here before, that they were bringing us some sort of culture, but that culture was actually some sort of bacteria and virus. That was the culture, not the culture we're talking about, singing, dancing, or anything joyful, and bringing us the fruits, the joys of British cooking. So that they wanted to celebrate, and Gary Foley and Chicka Dixon said, though, the point of view they took was that the Aboriginal Arts Board, Aboriginal people had nothing to celebrate with this fleet of convicts coming here. Therefore, they weren't going to fund anything to do with the celebration in 1988. They were going to take an exhibition overseas. The Australia Council, through various means, just basically sacked them. Of course, maybe they could have played their cards a bit more cunningly or stealthily, but there's nothing like making that direct statement. This is how Aboriginal people feel, and we will not take part here, but we will take exhibitions overseas. Well, they weren't sacked. Nobody gets sacked in the public service. They send you to the Dubbo Records or something school, or you should go and work in down in the Nowra and whatever, something or other, or they just don't renew your contract and they let you go, and that's what happened. However, unbeknownst to them, they had this really funny event happened. Bernard Luthi, this Swiss-German curator, had lots of connections and friends in Dusseldorf, and not a Swiss bank, but a German bank, and the state of North Rhine-Westphalen put up nearly 2 million Deutschmarks into the project. And 2 million Deutschmarks was a huge amount of money in the 1980s. The Deutschmark was a premier currency, and they also got Lufthansa to fund the freight to come from Australia to carry everything. And in the end of the day, the Australia Council either had to come to the party or look really stupid. So they then funded a number of artists to go to the venues. The thing about it was, in 1988, there was a big exhibition of Aboriginal art that went to New York to the Asia Society Gallery, called the Dreamings Exhibition. That was put together by a group of anthropologists, white anthropologists, and mainly concentrated on very traditional living Aboriginal people. They didn't have any art from the southeast or Brisbane or anyone from the East Coast in that exhibition. They were playing to the very traditional stereotype view of Aboriginal people, and against the story, as Marcia was talking before, about traditional Aboriginal people said, "We are all Aboriginal here, thank you. We invite you, we embrace those people in the southeast." Well, these people didn't. And mainly it went to what you might call ethnographic institutions. The Arajara exhibition embraced all people, all Aboriginal people, including people from the southeast. It included people, Richard Bell was actually in that show, Fiona was in that show, lots of other people were in that show from the southeast. Gordon Bennett, and so on, Judy Watson, they were all in that show, as well as people from Yuendumu or from Arnhem Land. But the three venues were the cutting-edge contemporary art venues. They'd only been built in the 1960s. The Kunsam Lung North Rhine-Westphalen, the Hayward Gallery and the Louisiana Museum in Denmark were really cutting-edge contemporary art spaces. And the specialty about it was they gathered Bamali Artist Cooperative and other people to be part of the advisory group, and I wrote about it saying that it was the first and most probably only Aboriginal organised and led international art exhibition. All the other exhibitions are organised through other international bodies or institutions. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, John. So, Vernon, you're not just a pretty face. Last week on Four Corners, the nation watched a program titled How Many More? About Aboriginal murdered and missing women, 12 times higher than the national average in terms of being murdered. In 2010, you made Tall Man, a 4-track video installation using footage obtained from anonymous sources about the 2004 Palm Island riots. And in 2012, you created portraits of Lex Wotton titled I See Deadly People. Do you think Australia is still at war with Aboriginal people? And why is it important to make art about the justice system and policing in our society?
Oh, these questions are pretty loaded, Fiona.
There hasn't been much politics here to date, so I thought let's get into it.
I feel like I should stand up. No, I just think, well, I just want to declare straight off, it seems obvious, but it may not be, because the society that we all exist in is a society that is in a perpetual state of denial, right? And the main thing it denies is the racism. And so racism is all around us all the time, and I'm just someone who doesn't ignore it. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, and we all work the same. I'm not saying that we want to, or I have to make everything about racism. It already is. I just don't ignore it, you know. And I feel a lot more comfortable negotiating spaces where I can understand the existing dynamics that are already there, and then I hunger for that. And so when I see something that needs to be pulled apart and teased out, and stood up in a line, and I can go along that line and then question every one of those things. It makes me feel like I can understand the world better, and I don't know why everyone doesn't do this. And so that's why I think it's vital that we do that. And it just reminds me that art is about asking questions. It's not about anything else. And I just think if art is not asking questions, then it is lesser. So, yeah.
So I might bring Julie in here, who's in her hotel room. She can see us. There she is on the screen. Julie, during 2021, you had a very successful publication come out titled Tense Past, obviously playing on the words past tense. Within the first few pages, there are a few pictographs of an Aboriginal man being shot and a European man being speared from Governor Arthur's proclamation to Aboriginal people dated 1829 to 1830. You have recently worked with these silhouettes of the proclamation and placed larger than life-size sculptures in the landscape beside the highways with a work titled The Missing. Can you talk to us a little about these new works and the public's reaction to them?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Firstly, thanks to the Ghana people, my respect, and for hosting me even despite my absence over the road in COVID ISO at the moment. So to the question, those figures have been haunting me through the larger proclamation panel of multiple figures of different genders and cultures together in this sort of unholy dance. And purportedly they were placed on trees to communicate to Aboriginal people. The original panel about foolscap size on a timber plank. So the realisation of them life-sized and along the highway, along the side of the road between Hobart and Launceston, was a dream since about 2010, when through conversations with particularly two relatives about the problem of the panels really, and that they're symptomatic of so much more that went down on our island and happened to our people that hasn't been addressed even to the present. That so conversations with family brought them to be extricated from the panel and envisioned as large as larger than life really. And so in 2010 I managed to create them as sort of templates in timber for a gallery setting, but they were always seen for me as the missing from the highway itself, where about 25 years ago a metalworker artist managed to populate the highway with I think 18 different figures of kind of colonial ambition and industry. So from convicts to swagmen to shepherds to, you know what, everything except us was in our face and present until last year when I was able to find support. And it was actually through the BOMA Mona program, a curator who heard me speak about these figures, Trudy Brinkman, approached me because so it's interesting that something that I was hoping would have some duration came to pass and be made thanks to a short-term festival program rather than through another means of permanency, that the festival funded it. And they're physically out there along the highway, 5 figures that are not all extricated from the panel, but so these were always intended by me to be in conversation with those that are already out there since the 1990s, and to talk about this absence, the missing, that we weren't evidently present except through the country that is ours and what our ancestors have made of the place, which is very evident, and why the Midlands has been so overpopulated and desecrated by sheep in particular, because we made it into such a beautiful grasslands over so many millennia. So I don't know what your second question was, Fiona, sorry. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little about these new works and the public's reaction to them?
Yeah. So I didn't think what would be the public reaction in a way. I wanted that conversation between those sculptural forms out there to happen and be on country. And even as so much is it's often the case as an artist that you don't actually hear the public reaction to your work. That's just some sort of given almost, that there's a grand silence unless there's a art review, perhaps. So there was a bit of publicity and at the time of the installation and some media interest, and it was I think viewed mostly positively. I didn't read the kind of letters to the editor type of level of critique though to know. For me, some of what was most challenging was having to find meet landholders and request permission to install them. So that's was much more of the process was taking the time and the thinking around where would be the optimum locations for these for the public to also be able to view them from the highway as they drove between Hobart and Launceston, and not being altogether successful for all of these figures to be in those most visible places due to the sentiments of those of the landholders I approached, and that several of them have so much of the land in the Midlands of Lutruwita, Tasmania, that us kind of inscribing our presence along long stretches of that highway is pretty much out of the question. But in terms of response, yeah, so I think that it's often the case we end up with our own kind of circle of people who tell us what they think, but that's not necessarily altogether helpful, though it is a kind of protective bubble sometimes.
Julie, the second question is also directed at you. Do you think the past is still tense? The 3-part documentary series by Rachel Perkins, The Australian Wars, recently screened on SBS. It featured the state of Tasmania in the second episode. Aboriginal artists have been working in this space for decades, relating to the creation of memorials, public art commissions, films and installations on the frontier wars. Why do you think your art wasn't featured in the documentary? As someone who is recognised as a prominent artist and academic, having worked with this subject matter over a long period of time.
So you're meaning just that very recent 3-part series, yeah?
That's correct.
So there wasn't a focus on art, though, was there in that series? I don't think.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question. Why do you think your art wasn't featured in the episode on Tasmania when you've been working in this space for a long time?
Well, I wouldn't have wanted my art to feature in that program anyway. So it's there were a range of people speaking who have authority and knowledge in the area. I think that's that would be perhaps a different kind of documentary that should still be made, where our various creative responses and kind of ways of communicating solutions in a way to how we might progress our island and knowledge of our very dark history happen. So, I mean, it was interesting because, for example, Hannah Gadsby undertook a series, do you remember? And she was kind of, I think, on par and on track with the kind of how you can range between the indoors, the gallery settings, the outdoors, beyond country, and talk about, in a way, art history as something incredibly useful that hasn't been utilised or mined enough and recognised as entirely useful for us, for First Peoples as well, to utilise as an archive for us. So the way that I utilised the proclamation panel as a source, as something on the record that implicates the colonists in what they may otherwise try to cover up. So yeah, I think that was trying to cram a whole lot into 3 episodes, and art would be another. It's another communication strategy that needs its own series. So let's hope that can happen.
Djon, if I can bring you in here, you conceived of the Aboriginal Memorial in 1988 and worked with 43 Arnhem Land artists to execute the installation consisting of 200 hollow log coffins for the Sydney Biennale. The sculpture has been on exhibit at the National Gallery of Australia for 34 years. In a recent article published in the Weekend Australian, the Australian War Memorial will have access to a budget of $550 million for expansion. This institution is reluctant to acknowledge the Australian frontier wars, saying instead it is the domain of the National Museum of Australia to tell this story. Does this country deserve a standalone and dedicated frontier war museum to address our history?
Well, my parents always told me never to mock the afflicted mentally or morally, I guess, for that matter, not to poke fun at stupid people. That's all I can think of. I think the people that are, I think, listening to Marcia tell the story of the Whitlam years and then listening to the idiots that we have had in the last 20 years is just mind-boggling. It's like we're in a place for the mentally retarded or something by comparison to these other thing of ideas and endeavours. Getting back to your question directly, it just stuns me when I had the idea to do the forest of memory for all those people killed in the frontier wars. I tried to come to a number, and as I came up near 88, I thought, well, obviously 88, 200 years, there'd be 200 poles. And I did have conversations with institutions in Sydney and Melbourne and other places about were they interested in being part of this process. And some of those people were also the curators at the National Australian War Memorial. And they both basically said they couldn't have it. They would never get this off the ground. And again, like you said, they quoted that they just said it wasn't the right place for it. I think possibly the only thing will be something along those lines, but there has to be a massive move of attitude of the Australian population and an incredible amount of political will on the part of any politician or government to change that. Even now, it's just galling for me that in this discussion that I think it's various people, the RSL and other people, have immediately mounted a campaign that no, this isn't the place for Abbott to talk about the frontier wars and all these stupid semantic arguments. Well, it wasn't really a war. You know, I don't know whether it was an earthquake or something, the rainbow serpent killed all the hundreds of thousands of people, or something killed all these hundreds of thousands of people. It wasn't a man-made act, and it certainly wasn't by the Australian authorities or the colonial authorities in any way. And I was asked this 2 weeks ago at the National Gallery's 40th anniversary celebrations, and about how did it end up in the art gallery, because the art gallery just immediately said, we will commission this, we want to support this, we'll give you the money to do it. The other thing that, you know, you've got to laugh. I mean, you can only laugh at stupidity. privately, of course. But you've got to laugh at vanity, that they think they're intelligent, they think they're doing the right thing. With $500 million, $500 million is a lot of money. I don't think we even were paid $200,000 to make this happen. People were fairly to make the memorial, Aboriginal memorial, happen. I never wanted to make the price any reason why they would say, oh, we can't afford that or anything else. Everyone was paid a fair price. At the time, it was a fair price, but I did not want to have any impediment that anyone could attack us and say, oh, they're spending billions or whatever on these Aborigines. So the thing was to create the memorial. That was the main thing that we had to do. And we could have asked for 14 million or something else, but we thought the main thing was to get the statement to happen, and to find an institution of like-minded people who would take that on board and run with it and be with us on that. So the National Gallery in that year did not have an exhibition, any exhibition of Aboriginal art, because that was what they were getting. The trend or the drift from the Aboriginal community was, we're boycotting these events, we're boycotting these happenings, so they weren't going to have anything. And then they said, well, this will be our sole Aboriginal statement, to install the Aboriginal memorial into the National Gallery. Then by asking for such a small price, etc., we were able to leverage other things. So they agreed it had to be permanently on display in a prominent place within the gallery. And it's been there 30-something years, nearly 40 years since. And it says that when you enter the gallery, everything, all the beautiful things in that gallery, all the products of creativity and imagination that you see in that gallery are predicated or mediated through the murder of hundreds of thousands of Aboriginal people, gave their lives that this thing is here.
Thank you, Djon. That's very powerful. Vernon, in your recent works, you created an installation at the Spring Hill Reservoir titled "Nothing Important Happened Today." It's the image on screen now, which circles around state violence. Earlier this year for MoMA, you created a series of text pieces around a circular fountain with one text reading, "Terrible things are revealed." Can you speak to these two works, please?
Yeah, so in Brisbane there's this amazing space called the Reservoir, and it was an actual reservoir that fed very early Brisbane, and that's not a set, it's real, that place, and it's an amazing place. And I just had an opportunity to have an exhibition there, and so I just said, yeah, I'll take it. But a place like that, you can't argue with the architecture, and so you have to work with it, but also it was an opportunity to work with the history of the site as well. And there were two Aboriginal executions on this site, and so for me it was a site of that kind of Aboriginal history, that kind of history of Brisbane, that kind of history of Queensland, and it was certainly not to be ignored, but the opportunity was to kind of strengthen the idea that we can speak directly to it, and use this site to do that. that history of those deaths, and the title of that show was called "Nothing Important Happened Today," which is an apocryphal kind of statement from, I think, Charles III or the King of England during American British Wars of Independence, and it's said that the King on July 4th, he wrote in his diary that nothing important happened today, but it was American Independence Day, and it's probably not true, but that's the title, but the title for me, I wanted to recontextualise it, saying that whenever significant things happen for blackfellas, the national narrative realigns that kind of parallel narrative for us to effectively say nothing important happened today. So whenever we have our victories, they're always consigned to the little victory bin. And so, you know, the nothing important happened bin of little victories. And that was the whole point. But this show is an amazing space, so we stripped it down, and there were basically 3 works there. There were the 2 portraits, so drawings. There was the installation in the centre of the space, which was suspended police shields that were also been drawn on with charcoal, and a video installation. And that was it. Those 3 elements, and they were really kind of conceived to strengthen that idea of we wanted to point towards the history of that site. And those drawings there, especially, those are 4 metres high, and they're a pair of lynchings. So that's what that was about. And the install down in Tasmania for monofoma was it was just using a lot of text that I thought could talk about. There's a history down there of protest, and every year for the march during Invasion Day, the blackfellas gather in Hobart, and they do the same march that the original 9, they say 9 warriors did, but I think there was like a group of about 30 of them, led by these warriors, when they were surrendering to the colony, and it's an amazing story about persistence, really, and survival, has to be said. And so those text works, for me, I wanted to speak directly to that particular bit of history, and we installed that in the site outside of Parliament House, in that park where they actually surrendered. It's amazing. I'm from North Queensland, from the rainforest. And so there's a lot of history that I don't know because I've never been there, and it doesn't touch me. But when you travel from North Queensland down to Tasmania, and you find out these kinds of histories that are on the ground there, I just think it can't help but resonate. So that's just part of it, and that particular text work, Terrible Things Are Revealed, that comes from who wrote it? It's a line from a statement that someone said that when a white man meets a black man, especially if the black man is powerless, terrible things are revealed. And that kind of summed up that interaction, not just in Tasmania, but everywhere.
So I want to move on to the final sets of questions which relate to legacy. And I'll ask you each what your legacy is. So Djon, looking back over time and looking forwards, you've worked in the visual arts for 40 years. what do you see as your legacy? And in addition, what direction do you think we could be going in?
Well, I don't know what we, as they say, what do you mean we, white man? But anyway, sorry, that's a joke. I died in Adelaide, God. One night in Adelaide. I think, I wonder what my legacy, I don't think my legacy has happened yet. What I'm going to leave behind, I think there are things we've worked on together, and there's things I did individually, and like the Aboriginal Memorial. I did other things besides the Aboriginal Memorial, but you think about the legacy of it. How do you? I placed it in the National Gallery. I then let them construct whatever they wanted to do with it. In a sense, I had to go on and do other things, and I'll do other things now in the future. But I think one of the legacies of that this year, this year and next, they will publish a publication about the Aboriginal Memorial and bring that discussion into play. And I like to think that in a small way it's contributed to bring this discussion about Aboriginal massacres and murders and that legacy, that ignominy into the national consciousness. I've contributed to that to say, well, look, all right, this is what's happened. And I think it's also given a lot of Aboriginal people a power, thinking we have the power to speak, we have the power to make contributions ourselves, and to bring the fact that Aboriginal people are in great numbers everywhere and do everything. We do everything. We don't just throw the boomerang or catch a kangaroo. We do lots of things. And that's what I think the legacy will be. And Aboriginal people now read, write, publish, are part of a national conversation about the Republic. We're a part of a national conversation about where the nation's going. And I think that's all you do is put a stone in the stream, and eventually there you have a crossing constructed. So if you do that every day, put a stone in the stream, you'll have a crossing across the water. And that's all I want to do. Excuse me. That's all I'd like to do, and think of my legacy that way. I've made other artworks, and you can't look backward. They will wear away. Anything that's supposed to be permanent won't be permanent, and the permanence will be about creating a consciousness within society. How the hell the Anzac consciousness has become so embedded is just beggars belief. That some people lead very small lives. Is all I can think. That the legacy should be that you create a conversation and shift the consciousness of people into something. I think in 1920, this is 2022, someone from the BBC rang up and asked me, would I make a comment? They were doing a program on 1922 and said, well, can you tell us something about in Aboriginal lives in Australia, what happened in 1922? Was there a shift or something massive? And I said, well, I wasn't alive then, but anyway. But all I could think of was D.H. Lawrence came here in 1922 and published a book about Australia called Kangaroo. And basically, essentially, he said that Australia was basically a neo-fascist society. And they were as thick as two planks is what he said. And all they could think about was how they had to kill the communists, whatever communists there were in Australia in 1922.
Thanks, John.
All right, I'll shut up now.
Julie, you've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to be like one of the MCs on the drum. You've got 2 minutes to wrap it up. What
All right.
do you see as your legacy as an artist?
I think hopefully it's more like the mode or the process of talking about stones, the idea of like leaving no stone unturned and just keep going, like just keep going, right? And look for gaps, look for solutions, be afraid and do it anyway, and test ideas and seek good role models and honour them, and don't waste time on negativity. So I just hope that the process by which I work is something that others can find useful, because you just keep going, really.
Thanks, Julie. That's great. Vernon, 2 minutes. What do you anticipate will be your legacy?
I don't know, because I'm not. I'm kind of not satisfied, and I think maybe legacy is. We shouldn't use that word, because it's. I just feel like the existing legacies, we need to undo them.
That's the theme for today, legacy.
Yeah. But
Going off the plan.
But we need to. For me personally, I just think, well, I need to go back and undo things I've done, and maybe moving forward, maybe the things that I've kind of set down need to be undone also. Like John's work needs to be undone, and I think that should be our way moving forward. I don't know. I'm not happy with what we have in front of us, and I don't know how we will be happy moving forward, unless a lot of things that we think we've accomplished have to be undone. So that's what I think my legacy will be.
Okay, so we've got 7 minutes for questions from the floor. Any bright person would like to ask a question of the panel? There are 2 mics that are going around, I believe.